Cook, Marquette, Ponder, and Walls are very proud of the results they obtain for their clients, but you should know that past results afford no guarantee of future results, that every case is different and must be judged on its own merits, and that the choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. And now, back to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn.
And welcome back to segment 2 of Tell Me I Have a Case, the show where we invite you to take a second look at the world of personal injury. I'm Matt Glenn alongside Dan Grimm, and we're talking today about the importance of early evidence gathering in your case. In segment 1, we talked a lot about premises liability cases and slip and falls at grocery stores and box stores and other types of premises cases. In segment 2, we want to talk a little bit about auto cases. And Dan, you do a lot of auto cases. What's the importance of early evidence gathering in an auto case?
The importance is that it helps corroborate what you're saying actually happened, because as you can imagine, all these cases, it's a dispute. And so you end up getting into a he said, she said type of situation. So you want to document and preserve what your evidence is. Like in an auto case, what you run into a lot of times is who caused the accident, where the accident occurred. And that's the value of having pictures or video is extremely helpful, because with pictures you can show if there's skid marks. Or sometimes in truck and tractor-trailer cases, you'll see actually gouges on the roadway that can show where the accident actually occurred at, which sometimes can be vitally important to support what your version of the story is versus the defendant's. Also, multiple car pileups or accidents, sometimes something as minor as what you can see as a paint transfer. One vehicle may be white, one vehicle may be red, and the red vehicle shows a paint transfer on your car. You can see that it was that vehicle that hit your car.
And what you're looking at, I've heard you say in the past, and I found in my experience, if you've got a case where one person says, oh, no, I had the green light, and your client says, no, I had the green light, you're looking for anything independent of those two that will corroborate your client's story.
That's exactly it. And so witnesses are extremely helpful, too, because someone that may be directly behind you, and we've had cases like this where there's a dispute who ran the red light or what color the light was. If you have someone that's behind you, the independent party, that can say, yeah, your light was green, it just helps establish who's liable, who's at fault. And that's key. And getting things such as name, phone number, email address is vitally important, because people change their phone number. So at least you have their address, their email address, their physical address. That type of early preservation of evidence can be key to supporting your version of the facts.
I know a lot of times you'll have somebody who witnesses an accident who will pull over to see, does anyone have any life-threatening injuries? And if they don't, their instinct is to want to leave. Leave even before the police officer gets there. I usually tell my clients, ask them if they'll stay and talk to the cops, but if they won't, then ask them if they'll leave a business card or leave their contact information so that you can get in touch with them down the road.
That's exactly it. I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, people think that the injuries are minor or they'll deal with it later. They're in a rush to get somewhere. Having that police officer come there, write a report, talk to both sides, talk to any witnesses, again, it helps develop the evidence early on as far as what's the facts of this case, what happened.
Yeah. What about photographs? How are those helpful?
Because later on, people's memories fade. I mean, so as far as photographs of the vehicle, for example, the damage to the vehicle, there could be arguments as far as, how hard was the impact. Photos help establish that the impact can be severe versus minor. If the car is later towed off or completely totaled and sold, you no longer have the car, but you do have the photograph showing where the impact occurred, how serious the impact was, to help, again, corroborate your version of the facts of what happened in this case.
Yeah. And what about, I know airbag deployment can oftentimes be a big thing.
Sure. So we often have clients, take pictures of the outside of the vehicle, but also inside the vehicle. Airbag deployment, again, shows that the impact was above a certain miles per hour that was hard enough to make the airbags deploy. Also, with airbags, there's a lot of secondary injuries that airbags cause, because it's almost like a shotgun coming out of your vehicle and hitting you in the face, the shoulders, the head. They can cause injuries from how forceful the airbags come out in just under a split second.
Yeah, and a lot of the early documentation, we talked about it a little bit in the premises case, but sometimes even car accident cases involve vegetation.
That's exactly it. We have a case and had cases in the past that Same thing, vegetation can block someone's line of sight. And again, as far as vegetation, preserving evidence early, vegetation changes daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. Vegetation can be removed, added, changed. So vegetation in certain situations, in numerous, car accidents, train accidents, bicycle accidents, can be the cause of someone's injury because it affects someone's vision and creates blind sights. Yeah. So the day of the crash or day of the injury, it's important to get video, to get pictures of what that vegetation looked like at that point in time, because that could cause not only the premises owner to be liable, or possibly the person driving a vehicle, but also maybe a landscaping company or somebody that planted the vegetation or was hired to maintain the vegetation.
Yeah, it's vitally important. I actually defended a property owner in a vegetation claim where the allegation was our tree was blocking the stop sign. And the one piece of evidence the plaintiff never developed, and it wasn't the attorney's fault. The attorney didn't get the case for a year and a half after the accident. But there weren't any photographs showing how far away from the intersection the stop sign became visible. And there are rules and regulations saying the stop sign must be visible. I believe it's 250 feet away from the intersection. And no one could really answer the question, was that stop sign visible? Did the vegetation actually block a driver's view of that stop sign? That's something that had it been documented on the day of the accident or the week after, they could have had that evidence, but they didn't get it. So a lot of what we've talked about so far deals with the sort of liability, like deals with proving that the other side was negligent. But one of the things I've heard you talk about a lot that is preservation of evidence is medical treatment. How do you tie that into preservation of evidence?
Sure. In these type of cases, any injury case, again, is providing evidence that corroborates that this injury was caused by this crash. It's not automatically assumed that this injury is caused by this crash. So along the same thought, as far as preserving evidence early, part of that is the minute you talk to a police officer, the police officer is going to ask if you're injured, describing what your injuries are, what you're feeling. Going to the doctor either that same day or the following day when the pain gets to the point where you want to be checked out by a doctor, is, again, establishing in a record that a crash happened, you're feeling injuries, whatever part of the body it is. The key is that it's shown that close in time to this crash or this accident, you are making statements in the medical records that you're having injuries. Again, it shows that in relation to time that these injuries were in relation to a day or a week when the crash occurred. And that's important because as opposed to if you wait 6 months and you hope that your injuries are going to heal up, again, there's going to be a dispute on the other side saying, well, you waited 6 months to go see a doctor. How do we know these injuries were caused by that crash that happened 6 months later? And just again, it affects credibility and affects how successfully you can negotiate your case.
Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, you have to have a doctor testify to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that your injuries are related to the crash. And you want to give the doctor as much opportunity to do that as you can, and you control when you go see that doctor. If a doctor sees you the day after an accident and you're telling him the day before the accident, I was pain-free, after the accident, now I have pain, the doctor's going to make the great intuitive leap and probably tie that injury to that claim. But if you tell him 6 months later, you're making that doctor's job really hard. It's really hard then to tie your injury to that car accident. And so to preserve that evidence, you want to do what they tell you to do at the ER, which is follow up in a few days. And when you're hurting, you need to go see somebody about that.
That's exactly right, because it's just, again, it's evidence that corroborates what you're saying as far as what was injured or hurt at or near the time of the crash.
Yeah. Now, a lot of the cases that we deal with in our office involve semi-trucks or tractor trailers. Those trucks typically have data recorders. Tell the people about what a data recorder does and why it's important to get it.
Sure. Motor vehicles nowadays have data recorders that record hard braking. They're often referred to as black boxes. But also you see these data recorders in airbag deployments that kind of show what happened at what time. These black boxes that are in semi-tractor trailers are often, it's important to record these because they'll show what the driver was doing seconds before this impact. It can track as far as mile per hours. Sometimes it actually has video recording. It'll show what the tractor trailer driver was seeing moments before the impact. Again, valuable evidence, critical evidence to help corroborate the facts of what happened in your case. it's key to get that evidence early because a lot of times if you wait, that evidence will be lost or destroyed.
Yeah, those data recorders, just like the cameras at a grocery store or at a big box store, they record over themselves at a certain amount of time. Some of them do. The first thing we do if we get a trucking case in our office is we find out who the defendant is and we mail to them a preservation letter, which requires them then to save all of the evidence that they could have that can help your case. That includes the camera that Dan referenced that shows what the driver sees. Some of the newer trucks even have a camera inside the cab on the driver that will show if maybe the driver decided to pick up his phone for a few seconds to check a text message and in those few seconds traveled several hundred feet and lost his opportunity to avoid colliding with you. We can find that evidence, but that evidence is going to get rolled over and potentially lost if we don't go after it early.
Right. And it helps solidify your case because what we want to do is this evidence helps it get away from a he said, she said case, but actually provides evidence of who was negligent, what was going on, and it just makes the case go a lot smoother. And a lot of people, they may want to wait. The problem is, if you wait a week, a month, a year to try to pursue your cases, a lot of this evidence has been destroyed.
A lot of it can be, yeah. You should still try if it's been a year since your injury, but it is a lot easier in the weeks after. And it's what we're trying to do in those weeks is trying to uncover every piece of evidence we can so that we all know exactly what happened. It's a matter of what we can prove, not, and we need that evidence to prove it.
And the black box evidence you see in semi-tractor trailers is critical. A lot of cars now have this type of evidence where it records hard braking, also how fast the car was going. But also part of the investigation, what we talked about too, is getting pictures, seeing skid marks, seeing gouge marks that may be in the asphalt or concrete on the roadway. Also, pictures, like you said, as far as vegetation. All that stuff can be lost through the passage of time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a little bit on auto cases and truck cases. We also do a fair amount of work in our office with intersection train collisions. Now, in southeast Missouri, the vast majority of road crossings over railroad tracks are uncontrolled by lights and gates. And in those cases, the number one most important piece of evidence that we gather is where the vegetation is. Now, the state law says that the vegetation cannot grow a certain distance from the railroad tracks, but vegetation changes every single day. So if we are out at a scene maybe 2 months after an accident, sometimes that's too long to know exactly where the vegetation was. The train company actually owns the land on either side of the railroad tracks, and they're required by law to keep that vegetation trimmed. The time for us to investigate a collision is the minute after it happens, because that's when they're out there. That's when they're out there documenting what they need. We need to be out there documenting it as well. And
that's a great point. So the insurance companies that hire attorneys for the train companies, how soon are they getting out there after a fatality or a collision?
Yeah, they're out there within hours. I mean, within hours, they're out there. They're doing their investigation. When we have Mike Ponder on one of our future shows, he's going to talk a lot about some of the cases he's had against some of the train companies and some of the steps they take right after these accidents, to try to protect them, to try to insulate themselves from liability. It's equally important if you have a claim like that you take those steps as well.
In some of those train cases, you talked about line of sight.
Line of sight's huge. Line of sight's everything. As you're approaching one of those crossings, the state law requires the train company to give you a certain distance from which you can see the train approaching in order to give you the right amount of time to stop or to clear the intersection before the train gets there. A lot of these crossings, the road is not in great shape, and you need to be able to see the train from a certain distance away. We're running short on time. Quickly, though, if you have a products liability case, you cannot prosecute it without the product. So if you are ever injured and you believe a product is at fault, save the product. If it's not under your control or custody, tell the person, preferably in writing, who does own it, that you want them to save it because you've been injured. And that will trigger a responsibility for them to do just that. We've been talking about the importance of gathering evidence early, and In your case, I'm Matt Glenn alongside Dan Grimm. You can find us at www.cbpw-law.com. You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case. Thanks for joining us.
You've been listening to Tell Me I Have a Case with Dan Grimm and Matt Glenn. If you have questions and need answers, contact Cook, Barquette, Ponder, and Wolz today. Just go to cbpw-law.com. See you next week for Tell Me I Have a Case. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and shouldn't be based solely on advertisements.